Good morning, YouTube. So, I'm going to talk to you about something called repressive tolerance. And the reason I'm going to talk to you about it is because it's been showing up a lot in the news lately, particularly from my favorite anti-fascist group, Antifa, of which I do not support, and I think we need to criminalize those participating in their protestation and aggressive actions against individuals. So, Herbert Marcuse was a teacher in the 1960s. He wrote an essay called Repressive Tolerance. Now, Marcuse was part of the Frankfurt Circle. He was brought into the United States in the 1920s as an immigrant fleeing Nazi Germany. He and the Frankfurt Circle themselves developed critical theory, and three prominent members wrote a dissertation called A Critique of Tolerance. Now, they all worked off of communistic and Marxistic ideas of the 1800s. Now, when reading through Repressive Tolerance, it's akin to reading Karl Marx. There is little argumentative structure. It's more of a rousing speech on paper. However, I will forego structural arguments, as it still fits a modern narrative-style essay, if just barely. One of the major arguments that Marcuse made was that tolerance is extended to politics, conditions, and modes of behavior which should not be tolerated because they are impeding, if not destroying, the chances of creating an existence without fear and misery. The very next statement is, this sort of tolerance strengthens the tyranny of the majority against which authentic liberals protest. Now, this sounds almost like something direct out of Karl Marx's manifesto, when he talks about shutting down petty bourgeoisie socialism and other types of socialism, destroying the communist revolution for freedom. Now, the rest of the crux of his claim goes along this line. Tolerance is turned from an active to a passive state, from a practice to non-practice. It is laissez-faire and constitutes authorities. It is the people who tolerate the government, which in turn tolerates opposition within a framework determined by the constituted authority. So he argues that the act of spreading tolerance has led to inaction. That the very act of tolerance is bad because it stops the idea he is spreading. Now, this is kind of a circular argument, because the only way his idea spreads is if others tolerate free speech of those who are adherents of his and adherents of Marx. And if they're not tolerant, then they're not going to hear him out and they're going to ignore his idea. And if they are tolerant, then they are not worthy of tolerance, because by allowing him to speak, they have allowed tolerance to give him a platform. It's a rather daft argument if you ask me, but this was his argument. He continues the de-evolution of moral and ethical action of the social contract, which is based on the entire social fabric of a country, to say this. Thus, within the repressive society, even progressive movements threaten to turn into their opposite, to the degree to which they accept the rules of the game. To take the most controversial case, the exercise of political rights, such as voting, letter writing to the press, to senators, protestation and demonstration, with prior renunciations of counter-violence. In a society, the total administration serves to strengthen the administration by testifying to the existence of democratic liberties, which in reality have changed their content and lost their effectiveness. In such a case, freedom of opinion, of assembly, and of speech become an instrument for absolving servitude. The argument continues on that an acceptable idea that tolerance must become universal without any constraints. Yet until universal tolerance is accepted, new conditions must be put on tolerance. This is where we get the idea of intolerance to Nazis is okay. That we must silence those that will harm society. Well, this whole idea has three glaring issues in its theory. The first thing is that both sides of the aisle get repressive activity. That means that the right and the left both have been harmed by tolerance and have the right to be regressively tolerant. So that basically brings society into a civil war on political party lines, which is kind of the point of Marxism to begin with, is to create a civil revolution where one class takes its rights back from the other class, from their perception. So this means that if this becomes part of society, we will quit civil debate and start repressing each other. And that's a bloody thought. Since repression includes things like resorting to violence, it could get quite bloody indeed. The second issue is that it's okay to repress those that are perceived as intolerant, even if they're tolerant. Well, this becomes a very slippery slope, because you, by the act of repressing those that you deem are intolerant, are in fact being intolerant. And you're basically saying, it's okay if I do it, but it's not okay if they do it. That's a childish argument. That's the argument of a 3-year-old. It's okay if I do it, but it's not okay if my friend does it. It's do as I say, not as I do. This doesn't work with children. It doesn't work child to adult. It doesn't really work in politics, and you shouldn't allow it to be a justified argument. What is good for one person must be good for all people, or not good for that person. And if it is truly good for that person, then everybody has that capability. Otherwise, we don't live in a situation of equality. We live in a situation of totalitarian repression, of authoritarianism. And because intolerance is a perceived difference and not measurable, it can be applied to anyone to counter an argument or to shut an argument down simply because they disagree with your point of view. It basically gives your opponent carte blanche to stop you from arguing. Now, the third idea is that repressive tolerance has no limits, which means the level of repression is valid in all levels. It's valid up until the point that perceived intolerance no longer exists, including violence, killing, mayhem, silencing of dissenting opinions, burning down of buildings and societal structures. Now, this theory is part of the critical theory crux and has come to teach things such as the critical race theory and intersectionality, which also in turn leads to feminism and modern race theory. And this is why the social justice warriors and the regressive left have lost all ability of debate. If they're practicing repressive tolerance as part of their core fundamental values and belief structures, then debate isn't necessary, because I'm right and you're wrong, and therefore I get the chance to repress you because you're wrong. And because you're wrong, you're the one being intolerant. And so this has given the progressives complete intolerance of everybody who isn't a progressive. And it has caused passive tolerance to be called back into question. They don't want to live and let live with differing views. They want to silence all dissenting views and repress anything that they perceive as intolerant. It's not an exchange of ideas. It's a mandate because they are right. And they know they're right because look at their theory. They are right. This isn't how you have a society. This isn't how the social construct and the social fabric are built. But they don't understand that. All they know is what they've been taught. And because the regressive theories include repressive tolerance, they won't look outside of their own ideas. And that means that you cannot bring forward new evidence to convince them. So, I encourage anyone who listens to my podcasts or starts listening to my podcasts to not practice repressive tolerance, because in and of itself leads to totalitarianism. And I'm not a supporter of totalitarianism. I'm a supporter of true freedom. And true freedom means that I have the right to disagree with you, and you have the right to disagree with me. And I don't have the right to shut you up because you disagree with me. And you don't have the right to shut me up because I disagree with you. It's the only way we can truly be a free society, an exchange in free goods and services, free ideas, free thoughts, and grow and evolve as an individual and as a people, as if we practice passive tolerance, allow everybody to exist, and allow people to make up their own minds and come to their own determinations. Because if we continue to practice this regressive tolerance, it's going to come to bloodshed. I mean, look at what's already happened. We've already seen bloodshed, and we've already seen crackdowns by police. Do we really want more of this? Well, that's all my thoughts on this for today. I am including some links in the description so that you can research Herbert Marcuse as well as read his thesis on repressive tolerance. I have a copy of his repressive tolerance thesis below in the links. There is also a link to the Herbert Marcuse homepage. There is a link to Amazon where you can purchase a critique of Purte Tolerance, which was his work with the other two most prominent members of the Frankfurt Circle. There is also a link to Herbert Marcuse's Soviet Marxism A Critical Analysis, and of course a link to minds.com/veteranmountainman, where you can contact me and interact with me on minds.com. Once again, if you like what I'm doing here, please like and subscribe to this channel and help support me in knowing that I am doing the right thing and that others are listening to my thoughts. Thank you and have a good day.